they did is they pulled together. So for the recording, I'm just kind of sharing something while we're getting ready to start. So TICER put together the threat group cards. So if you want to find out, like, okay, what's Panda? Who are the Panda actors? Who's the bear actors? You know, Panda is like, what's that, something from China. Who's the bear actors? Oh, those are coming from Russia, right? Who's Cozy Bear? Who's Override Panda? What's APT 32? What's APT, 3, right? You'll get these terms passed around when you read things in the press. You go, where are they getting these names? Well, TICER does a nice thing for the industry, and they put it all together in this report and they update it. So this is kind of like a nice tool that you can use in there. And I'll share it for people who haven't downloaded it yet, just so people can see it while we're waiting for that. So this is, I dropped a link in there so people can do, this is kind of like what they call a threat cards, right? And so yeah, it's a nice little tool set that we use in industry. So this sort of collaboration and sharing is the sort of things that we do with building up community, which I'll be talking about here in a minute, with going against the threat actors and the miscreants. So we have no questions. Remember, at any time, drop questions into the chat, and then I'll keep an eye on the chat. And also you can email me anytime. People say, oh, hard to get a hold of. Actually, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Just, I'm on WhatsApp. I'm on, WhatsApp and Signal are probably the two best chats to get a hold of me with it, on a whole bunch of different Slack channels and Slack activities and things like that. So yeah, I'm pretty, watch my email. So if you have questions, you need help, if you need somebody to come in and help convince your boss, or give a regular security talk to your company, let me know. I currently am parked in Akamai because I'm building really cool things in Akamai, but I go in and do talks without the Akamai hat on. Akamai doesn't care. They're okay with it because it helps increase the security posture of the internet. So just let me know. And Etienne asked me about the other slides. I'll share those here. There we go. These are the first two ones that came in. All right, good. All right, so let's now talk about, the miscreant risk. And this is one of the things that is, something that is important and relevant to the situation we're going through right now. Now, as I point out, by this time tomorrow, there'll be a section in here where these talks are going to be posted on this website here. Senkey is kind of like my site. If you see things pop up on Senkey, it's usually because within the industry, we're kind of like, this is kind of like a tool to get things out from the TLP amber, TLP red communities, and we kind of like make it into a TLP green, TLP white materials of messages we want to get out, or some of the blog stuff I do and things like that on security work. So this is kind of like a place to go. And over the years, I've been collecting all the DDoS resiliency workshop materials. And these workshop materials go on, quite a number of decades of work with it. If you're looking for something recent right away to look at some of the vectors, these are different video links you can look at. So these videos go on YouTube. I grab them from other sites I talk to and put them on here. So if it's either hosted on me or I put it into the playlist, so you can see the playlist from the past. Again, I put this in most of my sessions. If you're watching this as a tape and you're trying to figure out what I got to do for a DDoS situation, number one, don't panic. Number two, trust your team. Encourage collaboration, work within your DDoS community. Like for instance, you can reach out to your national CSIRT team. If you don't know what your national CSIRT team is, go to first.org. First.org has a list of all the national CSIRT teams on the planet, as well as the vendor CSIRT teams from most of the big vendors in the world. and then give your team time to get the work done. Right? It's key thing. You hear me over and over again. Decades of experience, the thing I found that the key thing you need to work through a security crisis is clear the path, give the team time to get the work done. So now let's talk about the threat. Reality that we have today is we live in an environment where there's so much happening with the network. There's so many things connected to our network that we have no idea are there, that if a bad guy wants to get into your network, they're getting into your network. So, some people say, what am I going to do? Like, for instance, does this sound familiar? I hear from another company that there's a increased risk, like right now, the National Sea Search, what we talked about in the last session, there's an increased risk, right? So, here, nation state, what's going on right now, we got nation state going on, right? So you got new things happening with that, all right? So then you go to my team and say, okay, what are we going to do? And it's funny, when I worked for an operator, that operator I worked for in Indonesia, me and the big boss says, we need to do something. I said, call the vendor. I said, okay, no, let's not call the vendor. What do we need to do? We should know what to do. Well, we need to call the vendor and beat up the vendor. Let's yell at the vendor. Like, no, that doesn't lead us to anything, right? The vendors are clueless many times. The vendors don't know. The vendor's job is to sell you stuff and maintain it. They don't know all the security stuff they're supposed to do, right? And then you call in security vendors. Now, the security vendors, of course, they'll offer you all sorts of solutions. Buy this and buy this and buy this and buy this. Okay, then you end up with like these vendor conversations and you're still going like, I got a long list of different solutions. I don't know where I'm going to go. Where's my answers? And right back to the beginning, what are we doing? What needs to be done, right? And you got higher frustration and decision paralysis. I don't put that in here, but then you got the organization that doesn't do anything. That's not good. So this is why this sounds familiar with it. So what do? Ask a vendor to help. Understand when they come through the door, the vendor's job, number one, is to sell you something, not to take care of your network. Their job is not to take care of your network. Their job is to sell you something, right? So understand that's what a vendor is going to do. If you go out there and ask some of the big consulting companies, their job is to consult. Their job is to consult and do lots of hours, book hours with consulting and give you reports and have you pay them for reports, right? That's what they do, right? If you go out there and ask security gurus, they don't know your network. So they're going to give all sorts of advice because you're hiring them to give advice, and they're going to give you advice. Whether the advice makes sense or not, you don't know, right? So this is why you hear this theme in there. Now, you can send a bunch of people to security training, but that doesn't take a lot of time. So it's really, I've done these workshops where I pull in the team and I invite, I had friends who run in other companies, and I would tell them, don't hire any of this. Just, I'll come in there and run a full day workshop with your existing team. And at the end of the day, they will have a list of critical things in the network. And here's what we need to work on. They know what to work on. What they need is time and somebody to facilitate. And then they will build their list of what needs to happen. And I will go and help explain why their list is important to the organization. So my role as a consultant was, one, facilitate to get all their ideas, because they know what's broke. They know what gets fixed, get it written down, help them prioritize, and then explain it to the bosses. So at the end of the day, we went through and we did a readout and said, here's what needs to happen, right? So one of the people asked before, where should I start? There's where you start, right? Trust your own team. You hear this over and over again. So this goes into where you tell the boss, right? Now, this is all leads. All this sort of consultation leads to something with the threat vectors, because it's interesting. In the industry, February 2000 was a big watershed. A friend of Philip and I, Philip Smith on here, Paul Ferguson, there was a NANOG, equivalent to APRICOT, NANOG, right? So that's the North American flavor of APRICOT. So, and you can watch the videos and things like that. And it's really funny. You go to the February 2000 video, and Steve Bellovin friend of ours, was given the keynote on DDoS attacks. And Steve Ellowen starts talking, and I'm sitting next to Paul Ferguson. Both of us are waking up because it's the first session in the morning. And all of a sudden, people's pagers start going off, and people are grabbing their laptops and running out of the room. And Paul and I look at each other going, what is going on? And that was the Mafia Boy attack, all right? And because it happened at a nanog, remember the power of groups like this, like APRICOT. So like next year when we physically meet, come physically, get the budget and come, it's worthwhile. Because at that nanog in February 2000, the ISPs all kind of like collaborate with each other, says, here's what we need to do. And the whole area of service provider security was created at that event. It's a big watershed. Before then, service providers weren't thinking that much about the intensity of security. Now that led up to years later, situational, okay? Here you have the Estonia attacks in 2007. The Estonia attacks, and this is relevant to what's happening to us right now. When the DOS attacks happened, they didn't happen by state actors. It wasn't the Russian government attacking. It was affiliates of the Russian government and allies of the Russian government. And they went after and attacked Estonia, but the resources they were hitting were in Amsterdam data centers and London data centers and US data centers. So in other words, they were getting hit, they were hitting the Estonia bank, but the Estonia bank didn't have major data centers in Estonia. They were located in a different country. All right. The battle space was the internet. All right. And here the service providers collaborated together. So what's going on today is really important. Like for instance, on another window off to the side, I got to mute it out, is the service provider community watching what's going on with the crisis. It's kind of like very much parallel to what happened in 2007 with Estonia. That collaboration community is really, really important because the bad guys collaborate with each other and we don't do it enough. So this community of trust, really important. So there's one of them which we'll talk about in another session, NSP Sec, we'll talk about some of the others out there, right? So these sort of communities of trust to actually group things together because the battle space is everywhere, right? And that's the key thing with it, because what we find is it's not public-private partnership that secures the internet. It's private-to-private collaboration with public participation. It's groups like this banding together. So, you know, take advantage of some of the tools to find out who has signed up for APRICOT, all right? And reach out to them. You know, say, I'm going to reach out, you know, either during a conference or after the conference, and you look at that registered, who has registered. That list of register is there not so you can go out there as a salesperson and say, I'm going to try to sell something to you. You reach out to them and say, hey, let's get on a call and meet each other. Let's work with each other. Or in the AP NOG, the peer impersonals, right? These is about meeting each other, you know, reach out to people afterwards with it. That's important from the security perspective, because what happens with these activities, they go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. You have these instant economic cycle. We have lots of ransomware, we have less ransomware. Like for instance, there are certain things that were going on to push back against the DDoS stressors and botters. So DDoS was going down in January. So we didn't have a certain amounts of DDoS traffic as much as we did in the early part of 2021. But now over the last week, DDoS has taken off again, right? So you get these cycles, they're situational, all right? And when you get a break, take a deep breath, collaborate, work with each other, right? Because these cycles will repeat, all right? So let's talk about the threat vector. Now the threat vector, the world's all changed because we got all these different things going on out there, right? The internet isn't the internet where you had a data center anymore because everything is like hyper interconnected. It's, you know, when you build out something now, you're in a physical data center, multiple clouds, multiple edge, you know, people working from home because of COVID, you know, the new way of working. So it's very mixed. It's not like a very clear cut, here is my data center, here's my DMZ, here's my protection mechanisms. It's much more complicated these days, and the bad guys are taking advantage of it. So Let's talk about the internet being our battle space. Why is it our battle space? Because, you know, people will look at a world like this and they say, ah, look at this physical world. This is the internet view of it, right? We don't view the internet as a physical construct. We view the internet as a group of autonomous systems interconnected to each other. Some of the autonomous systems span the entire planet. And this is how we interconnect with each other. So when you get these different attacks and miscreant activities, they're going all over, right? There's no national boundary effort with it. We do get regionalization. I mean, we do get attacks within a particular area. We get attacks within a particular language group, right? So you'll get a malware campaign in Spanish, a malware campaign in Mandarin, right? You'll get, you know, language-oriented malware campaigns. You know, but, you know, it's still spanned in where you don't have, like, you can't draw a line at the border of a physical country border. And that's why the internet battle space for anything is everywhere. But we have a problem. The problem is us as security professionals. And I run into this every day, you know, where people go like, oh, let's look at this botnet. This botnet is launched a bunch of attacks. And here's the packet profile of the botnet. And I go, okay, that's good. But who's doing it? How's it being controlled? What are they targeting? How are they targeting? What are they trying to take out with the packets? Right? What's the intent? Oh, yeah, but I want to talk about the botnet and the packets. Okay. So then the story I give to people says, okay, imagine you're somebody robbed the bank and you're the sheriff. And they go on and rob the bank and they had an AK-47 when they robbed the bank. And then they went out there and they got away. And then you're doing your press conference. You got to brief the press. And you get up there and you start saying, okay, so we had some people rob the bank and they had an AK-47 and they had a pink stock, had a 30-round magazine, and it had this nice little bandana. And here's how they held it. And, you know, people, the press would go like, what? Okay, who robbed the bank? What did it look like? How much money did they take? What was the damage? Are you going to catch them? How are you going to catch them? What are you doing to catch them? They don't care. You're okay, there's an AK-47 data point. Next. What are all the other things they care about? That's the key thing with a lot of our investigative work right now. We get so focused in the tools. Check out this malware in the life cycle of this malware. Okay, who's doing it though? What are they doing? What are they going after? Why are they going after it? Are they going after multiple people with it? Same thing with DDoS attacks. Are they going after multiple parties? You know, what's different? Are they doing attack rotation? Are they hitting across the horizontal surface area? Are they doing vertical access maneuvers? These are the sort of things you got to dive into to say, here's what happens with these, you know, to dive into understand what they're doing, right? Now, I break down our threat vectors into four areas. Each of them have different characteristics. We all talk about cyber criminals, and I'll talk more about cyber criminals because that's the one that hits us all the time over and over again because there's a monetary benefit for cyber criminals. So we're going to dive into that behavior pattern. What we're experiencing right now is nation state threats. Now, the thing with nation state threats is when you get nations going after each other, you have state controlled, right? You have state affiliates, right? Which are contractors working for the state. And then you have friends who are aligned with it. So you take like China, for example, you'll have state security, PLA, Xinhua, government agency, three of them. Each of them have contractors and universities working for them. And each of them have a whole bunch of people who are affiliated with them and they're friendlies, right? So you'll get these activities that come out during a crisis. Like take an example. Many years ago, Japan did their national curriculum and here's a national history book. And in the national history book, they didn't talk about a particular event that a lot of people got killed in a massacre in a city during the Second World War, and it was taken out of the history book, right? Well, the state actors didn't have to do anything, and the affiliates didn't have to do anything, but the citizens all rose up and started attacking, right? So that's a state level incident, but it wasn't the country controlling it or the contractors, it was the citizens doing it. So state threats are multifaceted because it's not necessarily controlled by governments. What's going on right now with Russia and Ukraine, controlled by governments, but this is one of the reasons why you're going to see a lot of collateral issues going on. So looking at your network after this talk and saying, what can we do to prepare? All right. Organization I work for has been doing this preparation work. All right. And we recommend everybody else doing that sort of preparation. You're also going to get protesters. So one of the things you're going to see with this added on here is you'll get, like, if you get tanks rolling across the border, you're going to get protesters rise up in different parts of the world and participate in doing things. They're not going to like it. All right. And we see these protesters, like every year when the whaling fleet leaves Japan, you get a bunch of anti-whalers doing cybersecurity attacks against Japanese companies. Right. That's political protesters. They're passionate about things. Right. And they orchestrate community-wide attacks. And what's interesting and different with them is they'll be on social media. So everybody will be on social media. Everybody download this tool and protest. Right. So that's the political patriot one. The fourth one, a lot of people don't realize is out there, and it's increasing, and it's more so in Asia than other places, where you get companies who get hired to break into other places, right? And we saw companies in Israel, companies in India being hired by oil companies and pipeline companies to actually profile and dox and expose First Nation people protesting the pipelines, right? You get these corporate threats and corporate against private citizen contracting threats. And this is like, I pay you to go out there and spy on people. I pay you to go out there and dox people. And this is like corporations paying things to happen. And that is a business out there. And there are companies that's what they do. And that's a threat. So when you look at the threat vectors against your organization, you break it down into these four areas. Lots of cyber criminals. Nation state is always going to be out there, right? You got the political protests. They could be a threat to you. Like, you got to look at your business practice, whether it can be increased out there. And you got corporations hiring to go after other corporations or other entities out there, right? So these are kind of like the big four vectors of the nation threats out there. They're not going to go away. So what I tell people is that this is like a force of nature. If you live in Florida in the United States, you're going to get hit by a hurricane. Not if you're going to get hit by a hurricane. You will get hit by a hurricane, right? It will hit you one day. Here's your property. You live in Florida. You're in hurricane zone. Hurricanes go up, down, left, right, all over Florida. Florida, you're going to get hit by a hurricane. It's just a fact of life. It's a force of nature. Cybersecurity is like that. Cybersecurity risk, the risk I kind of pointed back out there, with these different risks. These risk vectors out there, they're force of nature. All right. You're always going to be viewing that. So that's where you communicate to your boss. We have to do this work for DDoS resiliency and ransomware resiliency, because these are forces of nature and they can't be stopped. They're going to hit us. We just need to be prepared for it. But what happens sometimes is you get this dangerous marketing. So this is always, there's several of us in the DDoS community who's been doing this for quite a number of years. They get like, oh man, they're doing this dangerous marketing out there. And I did this one blog post as a joke, but it's a serious sort of stuff. So it's interesting to read the 1 yottabyte DOS attack. We had a 1 yottabyte DOS attack. Do you know what a yottabyte is? Go read the blog and find out what a yottabyte is. But what it points out to is these different factors. So the different factors is the size of DOS attacks are going to continue to grow. They're going to continue to grow because the internet grows. They're going to continue to grow because 20% of the internet, it's hard to do source address validation. So in this module, we'll talk about with source address validation. We'll talk about why 80% is easy and the 20% gets harder and harder and harder, because you're in all these different corner cases. But because the internet's grown, that 20% is grown. So the capacity of what that 20% can do for the DOS attack continues to grow. The number of infected devices that use bots continue to grow because you got this factor, what I call the democratization of innovation, right? I'll go to a different country. Like, it was really amazing. I went down there and visited a telco in Colombia. And the amount of innovation that I've been seeing going on in Colombia that you don't see anywhere else in the world, because it's innovation that was there. It's local innovation. It's democratized. A geek in Medellin can actually create hydroponic control systems that is unique to the situation there. And then the hydroponic control system, because the person knows about the mechanics and the hydroponics and connected to the internet, of course, does nothing about security. And so now you have a new IoT device connected to the internet, all the documentation in Spanish, because it's Medellin and democratization, and you got a new unsecured device connected to the internet. And that's happening all the time. And then the miscreants are always adding into things. So the miscreants keep on adding, so there's nothing stopping the economic incentives with it. So you're going to get size. Size is not something to focus on. So, it's just the risk is constantly there, right? So they ask, key thing, don't focus on the size, focus on who are the attackers, what are the tools they're doing, and what are they trying to do? How are they trying to actually, poke at you to get money or steal things or disrupt your business? What are they trying to do with it? Now, the industry, where there's a bunch of collaboration, this workshop, what we're doing right now, is part of a concerted effort. It's a coordinated effort to get more work out there, because what we saw in the first quarter of 2021, we saw a whole wave of plus 50 gig DDoS attacks. And when you get to that size of a DDoS attack, a smart bad guy can figure out how to set up the DDoS flow in such a way when it crosses an MLPPP link, take 400 gig connections and bond them together so you can get a 400 gig connection. A lot of us are doing things like that. Right? That's how we get the bigger circuits. We take 100 gig, 100 gig, 100 gig and start bundling them together. But then the routers are doing different types of load balance and packet. It's all in the queue. So if I attack the queue structure, then I can overload the entire link bundle, right? And so when you're at that size of attack, a bad guy who understands how networking works, how packet flows work, and how queuing theory work, can craft up something that can actually disrupt infrastructure. And that got people to say, we need to do something about it. And so there's actions in the industry, the collaboration, to actually push against it. One of the things is teaching classes like this and put another effort into it, right? How bad is this? We've seen it with the middle boxes. And the middle boxes was interesting. This is a report to read through. A couple of academics were commissioned to look at could censorship boxes in different countries, like in China and Saudi Arabia and Iran, be used as DDoS reflection tools. So, okay, interesting report. I look at it and I scratch my head and I go to researchers in my team in Akamai. Says, I think there's more here. So we took a colleague of mine. He actually set up a replication of the test. And then when we looked at the test, we actually expanded the test. We took what the academics did and did more, expanded it out. And we're ran the test. And we said, holy cow, this is 10 times worse than we thought. And of course, we did our part, right? We put in the monitors and tools, and by golly, the second week in January this year in 2022, people came back from vacation and they started weaponizing these middle boxes. And what are these middle boxes? These are your firewalls and load balancers. And what's really interesting about this is when I called up the different firewall and load balancer vendors and asked, are you guys paying attention to this? Are you doing anything to mitigate it? Because you could probably set up code inside your firewall and your load balancer and other devices and not make it such a bad reflector. And they go, we have never even thought about it. So this is one of the reasons why these types of attacks will continue over time. Damien put this particular piece of data out in response to show this logarithmic curve. Right. So Damien Mencher is over at Google. He runs DDoS protection for Google. It's scary, the amount of DDoS that that's out there. So this is his data. The red dots are Google. That's Google data. 3.47 terabytes of DOS, right at the end of the year. That that was not in a press release. So given this, with the DDoS behavior patterns and things that's going on with it, let's do some little like tools that we can use to actually understand what's going on with these guys. So I'm going to walk through 7 habits of highly effective cyber criminals. But what's interesting with this is this evolved back in 2000 before they called it the dark web. There was a bunch of us, several grouped together and created Team Cymru. So if you know Team Cymru, that this is kind of like, the early days before they became Team Cymru. And Rob Thomas, who's co-founder of Team Cymru, he and I were joking around about watching cyber criminals and watching the good ones and the bad ones, because we're seeing bad ones doing really stupid things, and doing stupid things that get them caught. And so we were joking around, says, what would a highly successful cyber criminal do? And we came up with these 7 things. And number 1, don't get caught. Number 2, don't work too hard. Number 3, follow the money. If you can't take out a target, move up to a couple dependency. We'll talk about that. Always do cross-jurisdictional, so you can't take you to court. Attack people who won't prosecute. Stay below the fame threshold. So this is all written up, and we'll walk through it in slides here in a few minutes. But what's interesting, that was like 2000. And this is the power of a behavior profile to doing your risk assessment, because you can use this as a tool, right? And, you got to remember the miscreant's objective, right? You kind of look through what they are doing with it and what services are doing. There's usually something going on out there. And this sort of behavior profiling comes right out of like law enforcement investigations. So we're like, when a law enforcement investigator goes and spends a rotation at the NCTFA, the National Cyber Forensics Task Force in Pittsburgh, they get taught these behavior profiles of understanding profiling criminals. It's typical to criminal investigative work. And it's what we need to do as security professionals to understand who would go after us and why would they go after us and what sort of behavior they would do. Because we can do certain things to be resistant, right? And you look at these DDoS extortion crews, you take one thing, the DDoS extortion crews, they went through these cycles. People thought DDoS extortion was gone, but no, it was just going up and down, up and down. If there's a high rate of return, for example, there'll be a lot of copycats on DDoS extortion. So if this is why one of the reasons why we say, don't pay the extortion. Don't pay the extortion, because when you pay the extortion, the behavior is more people will do it. And then you got an increased threat, right? And extortion is stopped. DDoS extortion is caught one of 3 things, because some people say, oh, I contracted this vendor and this vendor stopped the DDoS. No, you can put a DDoS scrubbing device out there. It doesn't stop the DDoS. The DDoS is still going on. It's just being scrubbed. All right. DDoS stops if the bad guy gets caught and arrested. DDoS stops if there's a risk of being caught and they shut it down and clean up the operations so they don't get caught. All right. And DDoS stops with the miscreant if they're not making a return on investment. And making a return on investment is the key thing. You want to make them work harder. If you make them work hard, they move on to somebody else, right? And that protects your organization. Now, some people say, well, then they move on to somebody else. Well, yeah, we prefer to go after and capture them. So an example of behavioral profiling, a colleague of mine, Tom Edmonds, he did a bunch of work out of Akamai where he profiled. So first thing he did is he profiled what was going on with the DDoS extortionist crew back in, the fall of 2020, right? Then what he did is he started profiling different threat actors that's going on, version 1, version 2, version 3. So you can see the type of profiles and the tool sets being used. So we can see certain methods of operations that the attackers are being used. And then with those methods of operations, we would go talk to customers and say, let's set up your network in this way. Like, for instance, one of the common themes we saw is the miscreants, all the miscreants, the threat actors, love to attack authoritative DNS. So we said, let's get your authoritative DNS pushed out to where it's a cloud. All the secondaries were in the cloud, because by pushing it up into the cloud, it made it harder to attack authoritative DNS instead of having everything in your data centers. So you push it out of data centers, you push it into the cloud or to the edge, and then it add resistance and then resiliency. And then the bad guy says, okay, well, if the DDoS is not easy, I can attack something else. And you do the next one. So you take care of the first couple of 2 or 3 sort of things and make it harder for them. And then what happens is, for that class of customers we did that with, the number of DOS attacks went down for the extortionists. The extortionists went elsewhere. So it didn't stop the extortionist attack. They just went elsewhere because you used behavior to understand the defensive mechanisms in there, right? So what are these attackers doing? You want to find out what ports and applications are doing, if they're moving to different addresses, if they're doing address different rotation. Right? And this is something we'll talk about the science and DDoS, right? A session. Are they changing the attack patterns? Are they targeting obscure services? Going after a couple dependencies. Are they hitting your DNS servers? These are all questions to ask where it gets you out of the here's the packet. And you start looking at, okay, what are they really targeting? Why are they targeting it? And what are they trying to achieve with it? Because you're looking for those levers, the levers that you can use the behavior profile to actually, I got, who was asking it earlier? Gary was asking, where do I start? So where to start by doing a profile with this is you got so many different things I could do to build DDoS resilience. When you see the attack, you say, okay, the behavior profile will help you figure out I do this versus that, right? Because if I do let's get my authoritative DNS off my data center and push it to secondaries on the edge. And what that will do is make it harder to attack. And then, okay, they stop attacking the DNS. My DNS is safer and I gain some performance and benefits. And okay, what's next? All right. So you basically go through the list and say, make it harder, make it harder, make it harder, make it harder. All right. And as a defensive mechanism. All right. So the goal is through here, if you look at the behavior, their goal is to make money through criminal extortion. They do their homework, they scout their targets, and they focus on industry verticals. So for instance, if you see an alert from, remember, the first session we did is on the National Sea Search, and they give an alert and say, they're targeting the water companies, and you're associated in the water industry, do something about it. They'll focus on the industry vertical, and they're going to start the target, and they're going to do their homework, but they're going to try to make money off of you, right? So you get things ready to go with it. So this is kind of like, watch these extortion behaviors. They'll pivot quickly. So when you do something like I protect DNS, they'll try something else, right? So they do some quick pivots. Now, what the goal is to have them pivot off of you and go after somebody else. Capturing them is an industry collective, and you want law enforcement to do that. And that's something we'll talk about in another session as part of this series. So this is kind of like where it's important with it. And they'll do this rotation. We'll talk about later on attack rotations of how that work. And then most organizations aren't paying attention to DDoS risk, and that's why they get hit, all right? Because remember, it's not about the bullets. It's about what they're doing, what the extortion's behavior, what's going on with them. That's the real threat vector, right? So when you look at this and you apply this with the 7 habits, right? Report to the law enforcement. In other words, make law enforcement your friend. Right? If you don't have a relationship with your local law enforcement, if you haven't called them in and had a meeting with them or take them out to lunch or something like that, this is something you need to do, because when the attacks happen, when the ransomware happens, law enforcement, if you have built the relationship up, can be your friend, right? To actually tap into other law enforcement resources to put some pressure on the things. Some people say, oh, I don't want to work with law enforcement, but my experience is it's been a benefit, not a hindrance, because you do some proactive planning. Deploy all the essential security tools, right? It's so amazing how much the essentials will push back on the badness, right? Make it harder and harder to deploy, right? And resiliency. So it's not just the DDoS resiliency tools, but it's other things along with it. Work with your ISP. Know what they can do and what they can't do, right? Protect your DNS. It's one of the things out there that we've seen as a big benefit win, because it's so easy to hit authoritative DNS systems, and it's so easy to protect them. All you need to do is push them to like an edge service. And there's slides in there that we'll go through, and we can touch on that if we have some extra time on the authoritative DNS part. And then build up your security community. This is, again, don't get caught, because it's amazing how ISPs can band together to actually trace back to the bad guys. then hand all the data over to law enforcement, and then they do investigations and they put handcuffs on people, right? Or they take down operations, or they, these do a massive like cleanup of criminal infrastructure, right? So let's dive a little bit more into these 7 habits, so you can kind of see how they apply in detail with it. So, again, we kind of walk through this. Principle 1, don't get caught. You got to think of this. The criminal's job is, I'm going to make money. I'm going to do the easiest job I can do, which is principle number 2, but I don't want to get caught. So anything that happens that exposes them to risk, right, where people can trace back, because they know that industry, collaborating with industry, can trace back and find them, right, over and over again, right? So anything that you can do to actually make it harder for them and set it up that where I go out there and prosecute. So one of the things that actually they pay attention to is if there's an organization that will go out there and work with law enforcement and prosecute, that increases their risk. They could get caught because they don't know what sort of data they have. Because remember, if you're working with service providers, or you are a service provider, you're sitting on a whole bunch of different data that you can go back and trace back to the bad guy. And if the bad guy knows you're doing this, they go, too much of a risk. I'm not going to target over there, right? Other thing they're going to do is they're not going to work too hard. They're going to take the easiest path. They work on easy crime, all right? If they're spending hours and hours and hours doing a penetration attack, that's too hard. That's my return on investment for my criminal activity is just way too hard, right? So for instance, people go, oh, DNS poisoning attacks, where you hit the resolver, the DNS resolver, and I put fake data, poison data into the DNS resolver. It's really hard. I don't know if people ever tried it. Even, I argue, God bless his soul, Dan Kaminsky. I argue with Dan Kaminsky all the time. Says, oh, you can do this. I said, Dan, it's hard. It's noisy. Everybody sees it. You do a poison attack, you got backscatter going all over the place. If you monitor for backscatter on your organization, you know that that resolver is trying to target example.com, and I'm example.com. It's noisy. It's hard. The bad guys know that. Why work too hard? There are easier things to do. Let's set up a system and put fish out there. Fish is easy. Let's do ransomware. Ransomware is easy. Let's launch a bunch of stressors and do DDoS and just throw a whole bunch of packets at the problem. It's easy. Harder if I have to do a DDoS and I have to set up the right packet flow to blow up a firewall, where I just have the right combination. I throw out the state table and a firewall. That's hard. Now, does that mean that that's not a risk? That's not a cyber criminal risk. A state actor could actually take the time, and a state actor is getting paid to work hard. So this is the thing. These principles apply to cyber risk, the cyber criminal risk, right? They'll follow the money. So a lot of times we catch them by following their money, right? Some of the operations I worked on in the past, when I worked on operations, they would deploy malware targeting European individuals who, and they would put middleware in there and steal money, and they move the money around, and the money will eventually end up into Los Angeles, into gangs in Los Angeles who set up secret shopper operations, and they would load up a crate of, they would take teenagers after school and they say, here's a bunch of credit cards with the money that was stolen from people in Europe. And then with the credit cards, they would go out there and buy a whole bunch of stuff. They had a shopping list, secret shopper. And they would buy a whole bunch of stuff and they deliver it to this truck on the 7-Eleven, and they load up a pallet, and then the pallet would be shipped to Nigeria and they sell it in Nigeria. And that's how they did the money laundering operations. You can follow that money. So that what I described right there was a big international Interpol FBI, investigation, and they followed the money and they found the people and arrested them all, right? So follow the money with it. If there's money to go after it, they'll go after the threat vector and the target. If you can't take out the target, move upstream. And we'll talk about that with the New Zealand, what happened in New Zealand last August, September, why this is scary, because it's happened in the past. It wasn't happening recently, but if, move up what they call vertical, if we move vertically up, right, or look for the critical dependency from a third party, that's one of the things that, you think I'm protected because I'm just protecting myself. But, the bad guy, if they really want to take you out, they can go after other aspects of it to make it easy. Always do things cross-jurisdictionally. In other words, if I'm going to attack you, I'm not going to use a DDoS tool in my country. I'm going to use a DDoS tool and use Tor and control it from, through Tor to a different country. So I'm going to set things up cross-jurisdictionally. It just makes it harder to not get caught, right? So that's one of the things they also do. They also, who's not going to prosecute? Whether it's used to be gambling, porn, chat tools. There was a whole wave of VoIP DDoS extortion attacks. And a lot of the VoIP operators are kind of like gray space VoIP operators. In other words, their main line of business is scammers who call up to Social Security scams in the United States or property scams in Canada or welfare scams in Europe, right? And that's their main line of business. So they weren't calling the police because they were already doing things in the gray space. And they were ripe targets for the miscreants to go after. I'm going to hit you with a DDoS extortion. I'm knock down your service. You're losing all this money. Pay me, right? That's kind of like what they do. The other thing they do is they stay below the pain threshold. So, for instance, one of the attack crews, what they do is they don't take out. They do the research and they don't take out the front end operations. In other words, if it's a bank, they don't take out the front end where everybody's going to the web properties. What they do is they take out the back end. So they take out the VPN remote access to the employees. They take out, the pay system so people can't put in their time cards. And they get management's attention and say, see, we can do this to you, right? So the customers of that target don't know that there's a DOS attack. They're under the threshold. And then the goal is to give me the money, otherwise I'm going to raise the threshold, and then they get hit. All right. So they'll find that pain threshold where I'll hit you underneath it, and then trigger something else, right, with it. So that's the threshold. The criminal trust, there's a whole bunch of crews now, but you got to remember, in the criminal world, trust is very guarded. They go the bad guys collaborate better than the good guys. Yes, but the competitors, the collaborators, they compete with each other, they cannibalize each other, they tear each other apart. So, you see this within criminal crews in different forms, and drug and human trafficking and other forms of criminological studies. It's a guarded trust. And you can break that guarded trust, right? So this is where some of the things that law enforcement community do intentionally. There are also dire consequences. People have died through these operations. In other words, when we do the takedowns, it's not something, like a famous one is Brian Krebs getting doxxed or getting swatted, right? Where police were called onto his residence and things like that. There's people who get, this happens, right? All right. So it's interesting, when I first did a tutorial on this in 2007, I put this slide up there, and it was like, watch out, this whole criminal enterprise is going to explode. And here we are in 2022, and the criminal enterprise is exploded. It's just a natural sort of thing of human society going all online, because we have these issues of human society with it. So now let's give us stuff going on with it, because there's a complacency bit. So in September 2021, there was a whole series of DDoS attacks going against New Zealand organizations. And we put this alert up because something strange happened, right? So this right here is TLP green. And the TLP green part is, because we're sharing this so people understand, because this could happen. And I was sharing this with people this week, and the organization meeting with Akamai says, look at this, what happened, because this is what cyber warfare could be, right? And that's some of us who are working attacks, we're thinking about, this is what's going on with it, right? So a good read through this is Ian Walsh's doc, and I'll I'll drop this in the chat. I think it kind of whited out here the URL with it, but he did a good one about why they're attacking. Because the strange thing about it is people couldn't figure out why. Remember, we're looking for a why. Usually a DDoS attack, you can sit back and say, this is why. This is what was going on with the why part, right? So we couldn't figure out what was going on with the why part, right? But what we're thinking about, it could be nation state, could have been that, could have been criminal gangs, right? It could have been ransomware, incentivizing companies, right? It could have been DDoS advertisement, like somebody has some new tools for hire. It could have been ego, like somebody wanted to brag about, hey, I was taking out targets in New Zealand, look at this. It could have been gaming, because we get a lot of DDoS in the gaming industry. I'm playing a game, you're playing a game, you're my competitor, I get a DDoS stressor service and I take you out. It gets as bad as, I have one colleague who works at a major telco in Canada and mentioned that, oh yeah, we had this one gamer DOS that was 70 gigs. I go like, why would somebody pay 70 gigs to take out a resident, a home, right? That's how the gaming DOS is very frequent out there. It could have been a commission DOS, right? But it could have been like some future team with it, but we couldn't identify any of this. That was the interesting thing about it. As we look through all the different profiles of the attack vector, none of this can be identified. We couldn't attribute it to any of these sort of behavior profiles, right? And that's what was scary. But what we saw, and this is the danger point, and this is, is the attackers were persistent. In other words, they would try something and then they rotate the packets because you put a defenses up there. So they would try something, and they stop. 15 minutes later, new attack, same target, different packet profile. Okay, mitigate. Okay, 15-minute stop. All right, new profile. Another stop. Okay, I'll hit a different target. Another stop. Okay, I'll hit a third-party dependency to that institution. In other words, because you have supply chain. Okay, wait a minute. That's weird. Using the same tools, right? Because it would use tools from like a service provider in Southeast Asia who have all their CPEs infected, or they would use, cloud resources that people didn't know was broken into, right? So they were using some really wild things, right? So they would try different attack monitors. So they'll monitor. And a lot of times the DDoS extortionists are not monitoring. They just throw an attack out. Here's your ransom note. Throw an attack out. Here's your extortion note, right? They're not monitoring the quality of it. Whoever was doing this was monitoring the quality, right? And trying something different, right? They would shift protocols, packet sizes, the DDoS tools, different ports targeted, different targets, right? Horizontally across in-hop other dependencies. So they were doing some really powerful reconnaissance. It would go on for hours. A lot of DDoS is like 5 minutes. Like I'm watching, there's a tool that our organization uses where we're looking at the DOS attacks coming in, like 5-minute attack, 10-minute attack, 30-minute attack. It's rare to see anything over 30 minutes, right? This is like going on hours, over and over and over again. It wasn't given up as an organization. So the service providers and the DOS partners and everybody was like working with a lot of different countermeasures on mitigating this stuff. Yes, the Microtech, remember I talked about router security and stuff? The Microtech bots were used, right? So, there's one of many tools. They weren't the only ones. Some people said it was all that, right? And it was just part of the attack, right? Microtech as the nefarious botnet, which is, one of the botnets with it, right? So, so that was, persistent. It was nasty, right? This is what a state actor looked like. And the thing that kind of got me and why I asked permission and we put the word out with this behavior change is a core aspect of that we haven't seen in like a decade. It was over a decade. We were seeing attack vectors in the type of protocols and the combinations used that we just haven't seen. There was like people on my team inside Akamai who are young. They're, in their 20s and they're super smart and they're brilliant. And we say, here's an attack profile. And I say, wow, this is new. I've never seen it. It says, oh, here's my PCAP from 2003. I go, oh, it's that old, but they're kids, right? They were like in grade school in 2003, right? So this is the thing that is alert with it. State actors out there know these things. They have this library and arsenal of this stuff with it. And that's the sort of thing that when you do your DDoS planning, understanding the behavior, there's criminal stuff that goes on, and there's these sort of attack vectors that are different, right? So, again, don't focus so much, like, for instance, people say, oh, it's the Maris botnet with New Zealand. Go, no, that wasn't the thing. Yes, this is one of the AK-47s that was used, but you got to understand the behavior patterns, because that was the thing. Why did they pick on New Zealand as an example? Because they didn't go elsewhere. Because usually when you see these things, they'll go like Oli mentioned a good point with the VoIP targets. It also had some persistent characteristic with it, but as VoIP target here, let's hit the North American ones, and let's hit the European ones. They shifted, right? There was a behavior to it. This one was just like hit this and then it disappeared. When it was over, and then we see the same behavior pattern again, right? So Etienne said they were testing for response time and resolve. Yes, that was one of the things. Test it, 15 minutes. It's like, how long did it take for the defenses to work, right? So, one theory was maybe this was a new nation state crew who is practicing. Could be, right? Pick on a target that's not going to go after you. Oh, let's go after New Zealand, which was strange. Why go after New Zealand? Because they're part of the Five Eyes, as I mentioned before. So that was also a head scratcher. So that's the kind of core thing, to look at it. These are behavior aspects of it. Use this kind of like as part of your DDoS resiliency planning. A lot of times people get so caught up with packets, and the vendors who come in talk about how many packets per second can I filter, and I can filter this attack and this attack and this attack. That's, to me, when I help build DDoS resiliency plans, I start with like, here's my business, here's how I could go, things, who would go after me, what's critical to my business, and I start planning around the business continuity. So your DDoS resiliency is part of your business continuity. And what are the different, here's how criminals can go after me. If I get caught up in a nation state, here's what can go after. If I got political activists who may not like my business, here's what I would do, that sort of thing, right? So that's the kind of factor around with it. So on here, right at the end here, if you're looking for like, okay, what more can I do between, today, tomorrow, other with it, there's a bunch of resources out there. We got really good resources. You notice in here, intentionally, I didn't import to the US resources. I got all of these I collect under the DDoS attack preparation workbook on Senkey. So I got that. The UK NCSC has got a really good one on DDoS attacks. And the Australian one, I like the Australian one as the national CSIRT guides out there. The Australian one's got a really good tool with it of going through with it. There's another one that will walk through, not in this APRICOT, but as part of like a APNIC or other tutorial, which walks through the postmortem of the DD4BC investigation. And you can read the blog off of there, or the guide. It's actually a guide where we did a postmortem of what would help you as an organization to design as part of your DDoS resiliency to be able to help law enforcement. What are the logs I need to collect and things like that based off of the DD4BC? Because what happened with DD4BC was that DOS crew, organizations who were targeted, we had to like quickly get the logs right, get the net flow right, get this turned on, get that turned on. And you don't want to do that during a crisis. And collecting all that information is helpful proactively versus reactively. And that's what that the preparing for DOS attack, the essentials, the DD4BC postmortem is good for. The two, if you're looking for, and this goes back to the question that was asked by Gary, right? I'll go back to Gary's questions. Where do I need to start? Here's two documents where I point organizations to start. Here's the 10 steps to prepare for attack walkthrough and the seven critical security conversations that you have. with it, right? So you can see what these look like. The 7 security conversations goes to a blog post, and essentially it's security conversations you have with, let's review different aspects of it, right? And so it's kind of like, here's these conversations you have, and then I provided a conversation guide that you can go through. Get rid of the ad. Oh, I'll have to fix that link so it's out there, but the meaningful conversations guide. So I'll fix that. So, okay. So questions now. Now it's a good time for a Q&A. Let me turn off the share and for questions, you can type it into the chat, or you can come off mute. Both of them work. If people haven't seen the chat, Oli mentioned the DDoS attack on the VoIP was, persistent, very persistent. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And they got Cloudflare in front of it, but even then they kept on going after it. And Cloudflare made it too hard, and they moved on. Let's see. Just wanted to share. Uters, right? So we'll give more detailed tutorial in some other sessions with Uters, right? So Uters is a remote trigger black hole and now a flow spec system and collaboration. So it's when I talked about service provider collaboration, it's a tool to help you out during a DDoS attack. It doesn't stop DDoS attacks, but it's a tool out there. And it's worth looking at. So it's like one of the tools where you say, okay, if I'm going to do a remote trigger black hole and set it up inside of my organization, then I can take the next step is set up that system where others can leverage that remote trigger black hole, and I can stop people inside my organization from attacking others. The complement to that is the shadow server reports that talk about here's the devices in your network that could be attacking others, right? So it kind of like goes hand in hand, right? You want to have one part which is setting up where you can help others out there with doing a inter-autonomous system remote trigger black hole. That's what others coordinates and sets up. And the other side of it is having the getting the reporting and cleaning things up off the network is the security hygiene. So, and Gary mentioned, how much should we rely on DDoS detection tools in a network, in our network upstream provider? I think on that one with the DDoS protection tools, again, it relates to the business side of it. I like having where when I protect particular properties, I like to have the alarms out there. Like for instance, if I set up an organization, I'm doing like an e-commerce site. I want to have my authoritative DNS. If somebody pokes at it with a DOS attack, I want alarms. If they go after my port 80, port 443, APIs, and you start poking with it, I want alarms with it. So because somebody just poking at it, there's a threshold with it with a DDoS attack, could be a probe, could be indication that somebody's paying attention. If you remember the story I gave with CNN back in 2000 for the Olympics, or not the Olympics, for the elections, they were looking at a particular trigger threshold that triggered the playbook, right? So what I'm looking for with an alert mechanism, with whatever I'm subscribing, whatever I'm setting up, whatever I'm architecting, I have a playbook of action, and I want to know when I activate that playbook, or when I activate inside the playbook a run book. Here's a play within that playbook. I'm going to activate this. So if I see this, then I do this, right? So that's the sort of alarms I want to set up with it. So it's, some people say, oh, I have these alarms. Okay, good. But set the alarms up so they do something. So there's action you can take off of it. So I hope that helps, Gary. It's kind of like how I do things. I very much marry it to my business continuity and a playbook to support the business continuity. And I make sure whatever defenses I set up I have the alarms to actually trigger the action. See, Wilson mentions the most recent DOS attacks we saw were aimed at flooding the server resources, not brute force large bandwidth type attacks, massive numbers of small packets. So yeah, so in the science of DDoS, you don't have to fill up a pipe. And when you find somebody who doesn't fill up a pipe, they have done their reconnaissance, right? So as they are filling up the resource, right? So I got a server here and I'm attacking the server. That server has a certain capacity. So if I figure out what the capacity of server is and I send just enough packets to fill up that server, or to fill up the state process on a firewall, or overload a load balancer, I've kind of scoped that out. I know what that is. And that immediately behavior profile, that person has done their homework, right? So immediately go like, if I'm hit with this sort of attack, I'm not dealing with a dummy. And what else, then this is behavior profiling related to this. What else have they scoped out? Right now, they're hitting me like in the description that Wilson's given, they're doing HTML head requests and they're flooding the resources, right? And you say, okay, if they're doing this, then I'm going to mitigate it. Got to get my business operation. And then I got to get a team ready to go because they can rotate. They can actually hit something else horizontally. They can go across my infrastructure and hit something else. And they may have done intelligence on those things, right? Or, they could be a distraction campaign, right? I'm having you work on this and I'm doing something else with ransomware, right? So that's a concept with it. Wilson mentioned here, it says very true, in a matter of 10 minutes, they switched attacks, right? So this is where, starting with not the AK-47, but starting with there's a person I'm battling, right? When you're in a DOS attack, you're battling a human being, not the packets, not the botnets, not the malware. Those are the weapons. Somebody's firing the weapons and they put some thought into it. How they use those weapons gives you an indication about, okay, who they are, what the capability is, what else can happen to me, what's my risk, right? So Wilson's scenario would be like, oh crap, all right, boss, we got an intelligent attacker going after us. I need more resources. I need this person, this person, this person on my team. Come on, right? Because this could be part of your playbook, sort of access. There's mention about slow walrus, which are different attacks that stay below the threshold. Like Gary mentioned about where do I put the thresholds? Well, one of the things you look at is not only that, but you look at attacks which are carpet bombing or swarm bombing. So carpet bombing is why I go through and I take my /24 horizontally, and then I do a packet in .0, .1, .2, .3, .4, .5, .6. And what happens is you bypass the firewall and DDoS protective mechanisms that are designed to protect, they're looking at a particular flow. So you're rotating the flow and you hit across the entire resource. Or you do a saturation where I hit all, 255 simultaneously, right? Or I hit all 255 where it doesn't even trigger the threshold. So when you talk about like slow walrus and attacks like that, these also say the same things about intelligent attacking, because a carpet bomb only works if somebody's scouted out the target, right? So Lachin mentions that, speaking of carpet bombing, I saw an attack recently which was increasing its number of source IPs and decreasing the size of the flows across the entire /24 until it fell below the threshold. So that's interesting in that what Lachin's describing is where you get this, if you see something like that, what he's describing is the attack starts, he's going across, and then it's being adjusted, right? That means what's going on is whoever that person is getting some telemetry back to monitor the attack and finding where the defense mechanisms turn off. Now, this is where keeping logs are important, because feedback telemetry means the bad guy has a telemetry tool measuring what's happening. So you go out there and say, oh, here's an attack. They got a whole bunch of spoofed addresses. If they're measuring an attack like Lachlan's mentioning, some of those addresses are not spoofed, right? They're valid addresses. And some organization says, oh, all the addresses are spoofed. There's no sense keeping them. I go like, no. If they're measuring, if they're having a QoS loop, the QoS has got to go somewhere. They'll have some of the addresses out there with broken in computers who are sitting there and they're getting backscatter and they're getting feedback coming back where they say, oh, did it work? Did it work? Did it work? Right? So there's a QoS that got set up with it. So this is where, you know, capturing logs with it, you know. So thanks for bringing up that question. That's a good one. Got time for a couple more questions.
Yeah,
good questions.
We probably should finish up, Barry. We're 10 minutes over, so.
Oh no.
Yeah, you have 4 more days of all this wonderful thing.
Yes. Okay. So thanks everybody. Stack up your questions for tomorrow. Looking forward to see everybody tomorrow. You know, we'll have a little bit more time for questions tomorrow, so you can actually start rolling them in. And then I'll have a few more slide decks open so I can show illustrations when you guys ask these tough questions to help get some pictures to it. So thanks, everyone.
All right. So thank you very much, Barry. So as was mentioned at the start, this is the first of your sessions for the next, well, for the whole week. So thank you very much for all that. This is now bringing us to the lunch break, which is, well, it was meant to be 45 minutes. It's now 30 minutes, which will let folks take a bit of a break, leg stretch, and so forth. There'll be a new Zoom session starting for the afternoon session. So we'll be terminating this session at the end of the, you know, once I've finished waffling away here. So otherwise, you know, I want to, again, as after I mentioned at the start, many appreciative thanks to the Internet Society for being our training partner, training sponsor for APRICOT 2022. So they're supporting all the training effort this whole week. So we really appreciate that. I had promised I'll play Internet Society's video, but when I did it for the other tutorial session, apparently on the video and no audio, not that there was much audio apart from some really nice music. So I'll spare you this time, and we'll try again a bit later on to play their video. Otherwise, thank you all very much. Please return for the afternoon sessions, and we will see you all very soon. And don't forget, Barry's back same time, same place tomorrow, for more exciting DDoS. Thanks all very much.